So from the Alisa Hotel here in Accra, this is the Citi Business Forum on Global Trade and Tariffs. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Bernard Kokuavle, the MC and moderator for today's program, which is part of the Citi Business Festival, an annual thought leadership platform for business. The Citi Business Festival is brought to you by Absa Bank, MTN Ghana, and Zonda Technology. Today we are gathered here to deliberate on a global challenge. The world has never been the same since the US president announced tariffs against a number of nations. The forum today will deliberate on what these tariffs mean for the global economy, its implications for the African continent, and what Ghana ought to do to hedge itself against a very serious period of uncertainty. The program is divided into three parts. In the first part, we're going to have a presentation by our keynote speaker, who's a management consultant and policy expert. That will be followed by a panel discussion involving some of the best minds in the trade and investment world. We have here at Alisa Hotel in person close to 100 industry people who will bring their perspectives to bear on a very important subject. Our goal is to get clarity on what Ghana should be prioritizing in this very uncertain period for the global economy. If you're listening to us on radio, 97.3 Citi FM, or television, Channel One, please get in touch with your questions or comments. If you're watching on television, there's a number that will be put on the stream where you can comment. If you're watching online as well, feel free to add your comments to the stream. If you're listening on radio, you can send us a comment on your regular WhatsApp number. Once again, we'd like to say a big thank you to our guests for being here for the program. Please put your hands together for yourselves one more time. We'd like to jump straight into action by inviting our keynote presenter. I'll just say a few things about him. We've worked with him at Citi for over a decade. He's one of the best minds we've had, done work on exports, done work on Afro champions. He is a management consultant with close to 2 decades of experience in the field and done very important work for large organizations like the World Bank, the IFC, the African Development Bank, EcoBank Transnational, ABSA, Standard Chartered, and Afri-Exim Bank. He is currently the managing partner at international advisory firm Confidence, where he oversees the work of a network of over 60 plus Africa region-focused consultants. So, to set the scene for the topic, the global tariff disputes, navigating Ghana's economic recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome my dear friend and brother, Michael Kuto. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Bernard. Always very kind introduction. Good morning. I enjoyed the breakfast. I hope all of you have enjoyed the breakfast as well. We are navigating recovery. I think it's good to navigate with some good breakfast. It's a good sign. So, what I'll do this morning, the real discussion will happen, as Bernard said, when the panel and the open forum happens. So, I'm going to try to do a theme setting. And obviously, I can't cover all the issues, because if I try to cover all the issues, then this forum is pointless. If you look at the theme, global tariff disputes, the sub-theme is what we really care about. But the tariff issue is the backdrop. So I'm going to focus much of my presentation on the tariff issues so that the panel and the open forum can discuss how we navigate Ghana's recovery. And as you're all aware, these two guys have been at each other's throat. Or, to put it quickly, one has been at the other's throat. It actually started with 2018, if you remember, during transfer stem. That's when the tariff tit for tat actually started. It started, on specific products, specific sectors. There was some tit for tat between the EU and the US, between the US and Mexico and Canada and then China. This has been going on. But what was unleashed in April, which Trump tagged US Liberation Day, was literally unheard of. It was actually a tariff apocalypse because it was really just going to mess up everything. Since then, we know that there's been efforts to try and pull back, contain, and all of that. Ghana had its own share of the tariffs, but we know that it's a complicated global issue. So with everything that has happened since that time, yesterday, Trump claimed that he reached an agreement with China. There's still a lot of uncertainty what the details of that is. In Africa, we had a lot of discussion about how this is going to affect different countries. Lesotho had a really, really, really big hit. South Africa has been under pressure. President Cyril Ramaphosa has had to go to the White House. It's a complicated issue. I know that in Ghana, I think either the foreign minister and the trade minister summoned the American ambassador. So, everybody sort of has had concerns. But what does this really mean for us as we try to navigate our recovery as a country? Where does Ghana stand? I'll look at how the situation could hit us directly and how it could hit us indirectly. So the analysis will look at direct effects and indirect effects. Now, direct effects. Really, what is the real exposure for Ghana? If you look at our top 10 exports to the US, this is for 2023. The total export was 1.7 billion USD. The year before, in 2022, was about $2.8 billion. So we suffered a 1 billion drop in our exports to the US between 22 and 23. But I suspect a lot of that is in crude, oil prices and output. So if you look at our exports to the US, 70% of the value is in crude petroleum. 70%. The rest of the 30% is in everything else, including non-traditional exports. So, in terms of direct effect, we may potentially suffer some effect. It's not clear whether the 15% tariff that was imposed is actually in effect yet. But technically, in principle, if that were to apply, there will be some effect on these products that we export to the US. Now, some of these products fall under AGOA. versus some of our rivals. And that's because Ghana, if you look at the tariff that was applied, the 15%, is the lowest. It's one of the lowest compared to some other countries that were hit with higher tariffs. So if we are competing with some of these countries in the US market, our products are going to be potentially cheaper. It doesn't mean that it'll be cheaper, because there are several other factors that go into your export competitiveness. How competitive your cost of production is, your logistics and your cost of reaching in the market. There's many more things that go into it, so it's not automatic. But there is the potential that we could be more competitive relative to some of our rivals in the US market. Now, again, if we really, really wanted to take the US market seriously, this is why as a country we need to start thinking strategically. What are these product lines? Who are the competitors? And how do we actually take advantage of this? I'm not sure whether we're thinking through these yet, but this potential is there. So overall, in terms of the direct hit, would say that it's not really much. There is actually some silver lining if we can take advantage of it. Now, what about the indirect? A lot of the indirect effects will go through ripples through our value chains. So one way to think about it is that Ghana supplies raw materials to manufacturers who may sell goods to the US, right? And if these countries lose US market share as a result of the tariffs, then there could be a potential knock-on effect for these customers that buy our inputs and our raw materials to manufacture and sell to these US markets that have lost market shares in. Now, if you look at this chart, it tells you our top 10 export destinations and the tariffs that have been imposed on them. So this is an attempt to proxy what this could look like. If you look at the countries where we export a lot of our products to, and most of our products to these countries are raw products. They are raw materials. A lot of them are raw materials. So if these countries have high exposures to the US market and they have had to lose market share in the US, potentially they could reduce the quantity of raw materials they buy from us. Now, we haven't done any rigorous modeling to try to determine what this actually will look like. So again, these are very high-level attempt to look at what the numbers could look like. So if you look at our top export destinations, and if you look at the tariffs that the US applied on them, they are quite high. 31% on Switzerland, 26% on India, 30% on South Africa. We know China was escalated to 125 until they decided to de-escalate and are still trying to come to some sort of truce. Canada, 25% is one of our top export destinations. And Italy, so they're all pretty high, right? We don't know yet, but these are all areas to think about how the effect could play out. Now, as an import-dependent economy, you could say that we risk potentially some sort of imported inflation if the tariff really messes up, supply chains and prices go up. So, but this imported inflation is not going to be a generalized inflation. It's going to be restricted to certain specific sectors and products that may have high exposure, to certain supply chains that may be adversely impacted, such that the cost of these imports, go up. So again, here you look at our top import origins, right? And we try and look at what the tariffs that the US applied on them look like. Overall, with the exception of China, 34, again, that went up to 125. The Netherlands, 20%. Russia, 20%. Now, there's a caveat here because we know that a lot of the input sourcing that goes into global, manufacturing is sourced much more widely from multiple sources, right? A lot of manufacturers now source diverse components from multiple locations. So it's not really the case that if any of these countries happens to be our top import origin and the tariffs cause an increase in the cost of production, it would necessarily impact us. So here, the assumption is that the effects may be muted and it's not necessarily going to be that much. Even if it happens, it will be restricted to specific product groups. Now, another way to think about this is to look at the macro cross-currents on our recovery. So we know what's been happening to the price of gold when there's a lot of uncertainty in the global economy. Gold is a product that investors buy into when there's a lot of uncertainty. So there's a lot of flight to safety into gold assets. So gold prices are doing well, and we export a lot of gold. And Trump's tariffs and all the tariff uncertainty is creating a lot of uncertainty. So this is one way in which this works well for us because we export a lot of gold. But we also know that all this disturbance to the global economy could result in a slowdown, even if not a global recession or a recession in some particular specific economies. It could potentially lead to a global slowdown. I think the World Bank released a report this week or last week that projected that the tariffs could lead to the biggest slowdown in the global economy in decades. So the risk is there. When Elon Musk had his little big fight with Trump, even he tweeted that the US must be in a recession before the end of this year because of the tariffs. So the risk of a slowdown, even if not a recession, is real. So even though we might be benefiting from gold prices doing well because of all these disturbances, if a global slowdown happens, that's not good for us because we export a lot of raw materials, we export a lot of commodities. And we know that whenever there's a global slowdown, there's a drop in the demand for commodities. We saw that happen, in the past, 2008 financial crisis and all of that. So this is one way in which it works in the reverse. Now, one of the things Trump has been promising to do is to unleash a comeback for American shale oil. So he calls it unleashing America's liquid gold. We know the last time shale really took on the global oil market, prices really crashed. Oil prices really crashed. I think this must have been around 2014, 2015. Prices really dropped all the way down. I think $30. Some went in the 20s before it came back. So this is something Ghana needs to watch. If this happens, it could have an impact on our oil, our crude oil export earnings. And mind you, 70% of all our exports into the US is crude petroleum. So if shale makes a comeback in the US, we could take a hit because shale will be significantly cheaper in the US. We would have to find new markets for our oil. So that's something to watch. It's an attempt to think through a few of these macros and to try to see what the potential effects or the risk outlook could look like. So if you take gold prices likely to rise, with all the uncertainty coming from the tariffs, in terms of our recovery, what does that mean for our public debt? What does that mean for our, economic growth? What does that mean for the deficit? What does that mean for inflation? What does that mean for the exchange rate? Our view at Confidence is that this one is a potential positive for all the macro variables that you see up there. If gold prices do well and we earn a lot more from gold, we accumulate more foreign exchange. We potentially could, do better with repaying our debt. It's a boost for our economic growth. It's good for the deficit. Since we're able to build up our reserves, and we know that a lot of our inflation comes through the exchange rate, it's also good for inflation potentially. So that's one way to think about it. But what about the risks of a global slowdown? What would that mean for our public debt? What would that mean for our GDP growth? What would that mean for the deficit and inflation and exchange rate? I've left these ones open. I think it's one of the things we could discuss during the panel and during the open forum, because I'm curious to know what you all think about, what a potential effect could look like. In terms of, if there's a surge in U.S. shale oil, again, what could the potential effects be? Because we know that there's a potential impact on our crude exports to the U.S. There's another one that I haven't put here, but which is very important, and that's remittances. Now, in the big, beautiful bill that, as they call it, Trump's big, beautiful bill that's in Congress now, there is a new levy that has been introduced, which is a 3.5% levy on remittances going out of the U.S. 3.5%. That's pretty high. It's higher than e-levy. And we know that we have a lot of our remittances coming from the U.S. So what's going to happen when this goes into effect? It was originally 5%, and they brought it down to 3.5%. Remittances, I think 2024 must have been about $6 billion in excess. We make more money from remittances than foreign direct investment as a country. So that's big. And it's not just remittances that, brings us a lot of forex. A lot of it also goes down to the household level. Pay school fees, household expenses, and all sorts of things. So a lot of households are very highly exposed to this. It's not just at the level of our forex reserves. So we need to pay attention to this. We haven't modeled what the potential effect of a 3.5% levy on remittances will be on the quantum of remittances that are coming from the US to Ghana. I don't know what it will be, but I think 3.5% is pretty high. So is it going to, make people send? Is it going to cause a drop in our remittances? And if that happens, that's very, very significant, potentially, a potential effect. Now, key takeaways before we go into the panel discussions. How do we tie all of this together? The first one is the tariff shock. Really, at Confidence, we think that it's more of a ripple than a wave for now, as far as the implications for our recovery is concerned. There might actually be a silver lining if we can decide to take advantage of it. So that's on the tariff side. Remember that I spoke about other other shocks that could happen outside of the tariffs. But as far as the tariffs are concerned, as we have them now, we shouldn't worry too much. We could actually take advantage of it. So in terms of opportunities, we could seize US niche advantages while rivals pay higher tariffs. So, that's something we need to be looking at. And additionally, Lesotho has been crying a lot. South Africa is complaining a lot. We could potentially, using the AfCFTA, attract some of that export, right? Lesotho could relocate some of those contracts together with the garments. We could expand our garment sector, through this. So these are potential advantages, but we need to be strategic and understand, which product lines, which value chains, which alliances and partnerships are required to take advantage of these. So there are opportunities, but we need to. And in terms of risk, as I did mention, there are potential risks to global value chains and commodity routings. We need to diversify our exports and our production from a resilience standpoint. That's very important. More than 50% of our exports are concentrated in 3 markets: UAE, India, Switzerland. So that's a pretty high concentration. Exposure is pretty high to just 3 countries. We need more diversification. We need both vertical and horizontal diversification. It's critical. We need to diversify the product lines within the sectors where we're doing well. We need to diversify into other sectors and value chains. In terms of risk, I think we need to keep monitoring aggressively. We need to invest in trade intelligence. We need to invest in global value chain mapping to anticipate shocks. I am not sure whether we'd really thought through all of this as a country and we have a game plan, but this is important. Now, before I go, this is my thought before we go into the panel discussions and the forum. Take a very, very good look at this map. In 2003, a smaller map in blue tells you what the case in Africa was in 2003 as far as the US and China's trade with the continent looked like in 2003. 2003, only 35% of African countries traded more with China than with the US. By 2023, every red is China. Every blue is the US. This is the current situation. 97% of the 54 countries in Africa do more trade with China than with the US. So, the US might be screaming and threatening, but the world has changed. This is the world in which we live. It's no longer America's world, as far as Africa's trade with the rest of the world is concerned. But, what does this mean for us as Africans, as Ghanaians? So in 2003, and I don't know if David Ofosudote is here. My big brother David likes to say that if you don't have a strategy, you will become a part of someone else's strategy. If you don't have a strategy, you are bound to be part of someone else's strategy. In 2003, most African countries were merely a part of America's strategy, as far as trade was concerned. In 2023, we are just merely a part of China's strategy. What is our strategy? We came up with the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA. We've signed it, we've ratified it. There's no action. There's no action. What is our strategy? This is nothing to celebrate. You might be an anti-American, and you might be pro-China. It's pointless. This means nothing if we don't have our own game plan. What is our strategy for engaging America? What is our strategy for engaging China? That's what matters. What's our strategy for trading amongst ourselves as Africans? Because the AfCFTA is our way out of all of these global trade arrangements that never benefit us. So in the short term, yes, we can analyze all of this. We can look at what the impact on our recovery is, and I think we'll have a robust discussion. But we need to look ahead. What do we really, really, really want to do as a country? To build resilience, to transform our economies. How do we do that as we navigate the recovery? So I will leave this here as my food for thought, our food for thought from Confidence. And I look forward to a robust panel discussion and an even more interesting open forum. Thank you very much.
Calling all farmers, agribusinesses, and innovators, this is your chance to shine. ChannelOne TV invites you to exhibit at AgriFair 2025, one of Ghana's largest agriculture exhibitions. From Friday 20th to Sunday the 22nd of June, the A4 Sutherland Children's Park in Accra will come alive with the very best from Ghana's agribusiness sector. Are you a farmer with fresh produce of any kind? Be it crops, livestock or poultry, fisheries or aquaculture, or you're a supplier of agro inputs and processing machinery? This is your platform to connect with the world. AgriFair 2025 is more than an exhibition. Showcase your fresh produce, share your expertise and experience, and grow your business. So, to all farmers with fresh produce, livestock or poultry, fisheries or aquaculture products, come, sell, network, and expand your business. AgriFair 2025, where culture meets innovation. Register now to secure your spot.
The former minister of many things. So we use former minister of trade, but he's been former minister of communication, education, even mines at some point. Also was Ghana's ambassador to the US many years ago. One of Africa's foremost communication professionals, Dr. Ekospio Gaba. Let's put our hands together for him. Doc, thank you for being here. It's good to see you. We're also very happy to have the CEO of, I call them Africa's leading economic think tank, and nobody has challenged me for that. So I suspect that's correct. The Africa Center for Economic Transformation, ASSET for short, Mavis Owusu Jemfi. Put your hands together for Mavis. They have a very unique approach to advising African countries, and I cannot forget your growth with depth. It's such a powerful tool for thinking about transformation on the continent. Mavis, thank you so much for that. We also have Emmanuel Mensah, who is head of trade and working capital for one of Africa's largest banks. As you know, Absa Bank is our key sponsor. Emmanuel Mensah is also on the panel. Round of applause for Emmanuel. And of course, Michael will be on the panel. We wanted to take a quick message from our sponsor before we jump into the panel. Is that ready now? If it's not, please, panel members, please come up stage. Indeed. We will leave a substantial amount of time for discussion because we have a lot of interesting people in the room. We have, as I said, the chair of one of the members of the Committee on Trade, who is also the MP for, this is very high, forgive me, this is the MP for Central Tone, Honorable Hotoji here. We also have the Vice President's Economic Advisor, Dr. Sharif Khalid, here with us as well. And then we have the Deputy General Secretary of the MPP, Haruna, here with us. We have a number of people from civil society, including CATS, the Borderless Alliance. We have GPRTU, Imoro, and the team from GPRTU. Give us a wave, GPRTU team. Thank you very much indeed. And other trade groups here with us as well. So all of them we would hear for as the program proceeds. So I'd like to cross over to my seat and then get straight into the panel discussion. We want to encourage you to send your comments if you're watching us on television on the number we have displayed on the screen. And if you're listening to us on radio, our phone number for the WhatsApp chat is 054-998-6996. So to structure the panel discussion, I want to group my questions into 4 so you can work with me. The first line of inquiry is opening thoughts on what is happening globally. Opening thoughts on what is happening globally. So by that I mean, how unprecedented is Mr. Trump's actions? Hello? And the reactions from other countries? How unexpected was it? What is the scale of it? So basically, I like first-time thoughts on those. Then the second round will be more about what risks do we face. I think Michael alluded to some of the risks, but I feel everybody will have their different angle to looking at it. What risks do we face? Then the third line of inquiry will be more to do with what opportunities does this present? Okay? What opportunities does this present? And then finally, what are the key takeaway action points? So that's the structure I have. Please, am I making sense so far? Is this making sense? All right. So what is the scale of what is going on? I read one post by an analyst that the economic effects of the Trumps could be as devastating as COVID-19 on the world economy. And I was like, whoa, this is quite big. I don't know. But that's what some people think. So I'm going to take opening thoughts. I'll start with Emmanuel. So you are a finance guy. You're a trade guy. You work one of the world's largest banks. How have you been monitoring what's happening from the U.S.? How seismic has the tariff policy implementation by Mr. Trump been in terms of your outlook? So let me see if your mic is working.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it is.
Thank you, Bernard, and good morning to everyone around the tables. So, Bernard, if you ask me, it's quite going to be varied in terms of how these geopolitical tensions when it comes to global trade and its impact on our economies, especially African economies, and particularly the economy of Ghana. The direct impact, as Michael indicated during his presentation, we might see it as quite minimal, but there are ripple effects that come to fore because of this. And I'll cite an example of what will happen if this tension continues to exist within these big players, where if the big players like China and the rest of Europe are being locked out of getting access to the European market, the swiftest and quickest intervention is to explore other markets, and they will turn their eyes on Africa. What will that mean for our production businesses in Ghana and on the African continent? What does that mean when it comes to direct investment into the continent? And I'll cite an example around the steel industry, where US is restricting importation of steel into their countries. What then will happen is that these China is the largest when it comes to steel manufacturing. They'll be exporting these into the African continent, and particularly Ghana. What does that mean for our steel industry? What does that mean for economic growth, impact on GDP, inflation, unemployment? So for me, I see this as a very big thing that we need to take a critical look at. But then, Bernard, my other point is we've seen such tensions in the past.
Okay.
As a country, I think we are too late, and maybe I'll say it's never late. We are too late in time in strategizing and trying to navigate this maze of geopolitics. And I like the point Michael indicated where he says we need to build trade intelligence. We have Ghana Statistical Service. What can they do? It's good to have a handle on your economic data points and do research and all that. But we should be taking keen interest in what is happening in other people's backyard. And that should guide us in navigating. I believe if we had these and is informing policy strategies, this wouldn't be much of a challenge for us. We are just caught in the web because we are really not prepared as a country
for
to
this.
navigate this.
Wonderful. Let me take the first time thought. Thank you, Emmanuel. Let me take the first time thoughts of Mavis on this from the perspective of how shocking and how seismic or seismic is this. Mavis, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. So let me begin by saying, like everything that President Trump has done, it shouldn't be a surprise. This has been coming for a long time. All that Trump did in his second term is push us off the cliff. Okay? So trade wars, you know, we've been debating and discussing it for a long time. Our relationship with Europe as Africa has been shifting for a while. The difference is Europe did not push us off a cliff edge. When Trump came in his first term, most of the tariffs he put in place were kept by the Democrats. Okay, nothing changed. And so what tends to happen is in his second term, he decided, you know, this is too slow. And he's pushed everybody off a cliff edge, and we all seem surprised by it. So the first thing is, for me, Bernard, it's not a surprise. We've seen this coming. It's the time frame that seems to have shocked everybody. And the fact that it has been, let's move, let's stop, let's move, let's stop, let's move that, let's stop, tells you about the uncertainty and the lack of an analysis underpinning this and the amount of work. It's shocking the system for the system to respond, okay? So what I think for me really was devastating as an African as we watched this process was, as soon as Trump announced the first round of tariffs and everybody was shocked, the Asians got together and started strategizing and planning, okay? They didn't go one by one to see Trump. They didn't start negotiating with ambassadors at their nation states. They came together and said, as a sub-region, how do we respond to this issue? And came up with a game plan. Immediately, America realized that it had to take a different approach to how it engaged with Asia. Where is our common voice? And having said this, remember, ASEAN is not a bloc. It doesn't tout to be AU or AfCFTA or any of the things we are so proud about. It doesn't do it. It doesn't have a theoretical framework it's proud about. But it had a structure for implementation in a crisis. So my first question, the thing that disappointed me the most in all of this was Africa forgot why we set up the AfCFTA in the first place. Africa forgot the processes we have in place for the African Union. In fact, Africa even forgot we had the AfDB, because it wasn't until a week ago that I had an AfDB position on the tariffs. We all started going one by one by one by one. So, and then the final point I wanted to make was, and then we are helter-skeltering again, including in our beloved Ghana, and saying, what is the impact going to be on us? What is the impact going to be on us? What is the impact going to be on us? I just want to leave you with one very quick statistic. We talk about diversification as if it's the most attractive thing on the planet Earth, and we do nothing about it, okay? In Africa, 14% of our trade is amongst ourselves, okay? But 40% of this trade is manufacturing, okay? So when we trade with ourselves, we trade on the thing that will deepen our economies, structurally transform our economies, and help us compete. Okay? Asia does it without setting up an AfCFTA. And they compete with the world by working together. And when they have a crisis, they come together and fix it. Okay? So we are busy panicking because of one country. And Mr. Koto, you were talking a lot about, the link between EU and Africa, it's EU and America, and who takes our raw material and adds value to it, etc., etc., etc. For me, that is a red herring. The Lobito corridor should be our priority right now. The Akosombo corridor. Bernard, can I digress for 1 second? Just 1 second.
Feel free.
We have a 25% decrease on our imports all of a sudden. Suddenly we're paying 25% less on our imports because of the Citi appreciation. Okay? And we're talking about the Akosombo corridor. We know most of that stuff has to be imported in for us to build that industrial park that we want. Shouldn't this be the time when the business community and government should be sitting together to think through how we fast track that? So that we can start laying the foundation for trading with Africa and the rest of the world, instead of worrying about Trump's trade tariffs, which, to be honest, it's almost negligible on Ghana right now, if we are really honest. It's negligible on us.
So thank you, Mavis. A round of applause for Mavis. So I noticed that both you and Emmanuel are jumping straight into what ought to be done because you're in a hurry. But I'll still stick to my structure. I want to take opening thoughts from Dr. Spiogabra. Having done all the things you've done, how big is what's going on as a curveball or a black swan in the world? Doc, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues, friends. Subject matter and the questions actually sets me reflecting from which of many perspectives you would prefer my answer to come from. Because I would say, with due respect and for the sake of those who may be younger and probably don't know me that well, I must confess that amongst my relevance to the subject is that I may be the only one here who has been an ambassador to the United States before.
You may.
So, I may be wrong, but that's what I can see from the crowd. And therefore, the question about Trump and his behavior in the United States, when posed to me from my diplomatic experience, will get a certain kind of answer.
Yeah.
And that answer is that Trump, as a human being, is very much a very unpredictable person. And so much as we may be trying to analyze his decisions from a trade policy point of view, actually psychoanalysts may help us better in helping to uncover the likely actions of a man. May have a very good friend called Elon Musk only 4 or 5 months ago, and all of a sudden he's in a kind of a divorce dispute with a so-called best friend. So that gives you a certain perspective.
Okay.
I am saying that I'm also in a certain fix because the role I have played include the fact that I was the last Minister of Trade and Industry of the NDC government, and I had the responsibility of putting up the now well-known 12-story building called the Africa Trade House when I was Minister of Trade and Industry. The word industry often gets missed when you say Minister of Trade. And the industry part is really the most important part, at least from my perspective. Now we're talking about trade issues, but the trade without the industry really does not make much sense. That's why the extent to which we are a manufacturing nation, as you just said, 40% of our exports may be at the manufactured side, is critical. So how we respond to it, if that's not a question you're asking now, but which I'll come to later, it's important to understand the structure of our economy and our export-import regime. And I think most of us now know that Ghana imports about $17 billion per year and also exports about $17 billion. So for last year, I think our trade balance was only about 500 million in the negative side, which is not bad. It's really balanced in terms of our imports and exports. But of course, we would want to be an export-driven economy so that we actually would wish our exports can overtake our imports by 20-30%. That's going forward. Now, if we also, I heard mention of the African Development Bank, which has only issued a recent report. I was in Abidjan just 2 weeks ago for the African Development Bank annual meeting. So I must also confess that I was also a former director level officer of the African Development Bank. But I was also a member of the team, 15 people who helped to create the African Export-Import Bank, which is based in Cairo.
AfCFTA.
So the discussion actually, the AfCFTA is a more relevant institution for this discussion than African Development Bank, which is more long-term funding, finance, and development issues. So if African Export-Import Bank has not yet issued a statement on this, that's the one that will worry me most. By the end of the day, the issue is how should Ghana respond to these gyrations from the American side? And I think the advice of my good friend, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, who is now the Director General of the World Trade Organization, actually is, I guess, the most appropriate, that countries should relax and observe and monitor what is happening. Because, as I said, psychoanalysis, the man can start tomorrow and say, okay, all tariffs have been removed, but only Ghana will take 50% of Ghana. You can do that tomorrow, either by Twitter or by X or by whatever. And that's the policy for 5 minutes, or for 20 minutes, or 2 hours. And then the next week can be something else. So the situation is so unpredictable. The unpredictability of the policy framework of the United States is what I would like to refer to, but also to acknowledge that now that we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, that's a regional trade-oriented institution, it's better for that organization to be the voice of Africa at this particular time than individual countries running around being scared about what they should do and not do, so that we take collective action through the AfCFTA, and I also happen to be among the ambassadors then in the United States who signed the initial documents that led to the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, AGOA. It was in the 1990s when that particular US law came into existence. So I happen to have had those kinds of experiences, and I thought there's a time when collective knowledge from a number of institutions, a number of personalities, if put together properly on behalf of Africa, can help us all to navigate the choppy waters that are ahead of us. Finally, it is important to state that whatever the United States does is being done by one country. That one country does not control more than about 70% of global trade or global anything. It does contribute 20% or so to the United Nations, and sometimes near 20% to the other multilateral institutions, etc. But notice how the Bank of Canada, former Bank of Canada governor, who also was the Bank of England governor, and who is now Prime Minister of Canada, how he took on America without making any noise. Just attending to the bond markets and getting his European friends with some Asian friends to escalate the cost to the United States of United States borrowing. United States is the world's largest debtor nation, and they are adding to their debts. If you followed the recent debates in Congress about increasing the debt of the United States, because you're a debtor nation making a lot of noise. So if your creditors just get together and they hit you 2 or 3 punches, you're finished. So that's where I think the world can respond to the United States on this particular matter. But there are many other aspects that I have to give the.
Please put your hands together for Doc. Thank you. It's almost like you are answering an exam question and you want to tell the examiner which angle should I come from. From the ambassador angle, from the trade and industry angle, from the AFDB angle. That's why we brought you on the panel. So I think everybody is in a hurry to go into opportunities. But Michael, I just wanted to come to you. So of all the things you said in your presentation, did I hear you say that our narrow diversification of exports is a greater risk. The fact that the concentration on Switzerland, I think it was UAE and India. Can you elaborate on that a bit? If you talk about diversifying exports, you are not referring to products alone. You are referring to countries too. So just elaborate a bit about that before I jump into the substantive question.
Yeah, it's both products and markets.
Okay.
You need to do both. Products, industries, markets. So at a product level, we need to do more value addition.
Okay.
That's been our biggest challenge. Industrialization is hard, but countries have shown that it is possible. It is doable. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of focus. It takes a lot of long-term planning and sticking to the plan, not ad hoc approaches that change every 2-4 years. No continuity in policy. So that's been our challenge. So if you look across Africa, and I maybe say something very important about how, if you look at intra-Africa trade, it is the biggest driver of value addition and manufacturing in the continent. So if we want to do more value addition, if we want to industrialize faster, the natural pathway is to do more intra-Africa trade, right? But we're not doing it. So the pathways are there. If we have to diversify our markets, we should look within the continent first.
Okay.
Because the data is clear, right? It's much harder to diversify your value-added and exports into more advanced markets where the competition is stiffer. But we can do it in Africa. So yes, we need to do both products. Okay. We need to do diversification of different sectors, but we need to do markets. Okay. We did some work a couple of years ago. At Confidence, we're trying to look at what the export potential for various products that Ghana manufactures, is within the African continent. The surprising thing was that in many of the markets where we had a lot of export potential, we were underutilizing that potential. Grossly underutilizing that potential, sometimes by over 50%, 70%. Okay. Right? So we know that it's tough, to move goods and commodities within the continent. So it's a different discussion. Right. But if we are focused, it can be done. And we need to start first within the continent.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what I hear from my panelists is that there's no sense trying to second guess what Trump will do. But what we need to do is to get our house in order, act collectively, and act deliberately. Each of the 4 panelists has mentioned AfCFTA. So I want to give you a quick overview of where we are with AfCFTA. As of May 2025, and by the way, AfCFTA is a framework that is hoping to eliminate about 90% of our intra-African tariffs. 54 countries have signed, 47 have ratified. So on paper, it looks like the countries are interested. Now, here is the problem. Whether you sign AfCFTA or not, you have infrastructure problems. Transportation of goods. You have a narrow export base. As he said, most countries are exporting raw commodities. You have a financing gap for diversification. You have non-tariff barriers. I drove to Togo 3 weeks. It was an interesting sight to behold. So the road is the same, but there are many things. So the point is that there are non-tariff barriers, and then there's also fragmented regulations. So I want us to attack the AfCFTA question in this round. All right? And I'm going to start again with Emmanuel. Let's deal with the financing issue. There's always a financing gap somewhere. Doc is talking about AfroEximBank being the real bank that will spare the trade issue in Africa. You are head of trade at a big bank. What are your thoughts around how to crack financing for the African continent when it comes to export diversification and also enhance export? What is the issue? Is it interest rates? Is it lack of capital from somewhere? Recently we are told that even AfroEximBank was downgraded by some credit rating agency. I mean, Do we have our own credit rating agency? What do we need to do to crack the finance component of the AfCFTA conundrum? Is my question clear? I'll start with you.
Thanks, Bernard. I think the financing issue can be in several parts. We're looking at the short term and also the long term. And to your point, with regards to AfCFTA and for us to really trade amongst ourselves very well, we require a very robust transport network, which will require long-term financing. So, in that,
which one comes first?
So, transport is very key, because if you produce goods and you can't transport it, how do you get value out of those goods?
But how do you build the transportation if you don't have money?
I always say that the issue is not about there's no money. Banks are investors, and they will only invest when the risk is low. Banks, and it's depositors' money. So
forget about banks for a minute. Finance broadly, not just banks qua banks.
Sure.
So what you said, does that apply to all types of finance or just banks?
So, I mean, we all know about venture capital and all those, and angel investors and all that. The level of funds available from those sectors will not be adequate to support this drive. So, obviously, there need to be a collective agenda in terms of mobilizing funds for this agenda, which, I mean, AfDB could take, a center stage in helping banks on the continent to mobilize. But this funding will be available when there's a proper assessment of the opportunities and the risk inherent in implementing these projects. Because no bank wants to invest and then the returns doesn't come through. It's depositors' money.
So let's make it practical. Dakar to Lagos is a major corridor. Ghana has about 40% of that. It's probably, even within Ghana, it's probably the most difficult road to use from Elubo to Aplao, right? The Ivory Coast side is pretty decent. I was in Togo. The roads are pretty good. So should we have a regional approach to financing that road, or should we have a national approach? Because the standards are different, right? How do you do Dakar to Lagos? Is it something that big banks should come together to think about? Is it? I just want you to help me here.
So in terms of that financing approach, yes, banks will come together, but it will start with the states. The countries need to come in to say that what is our commitment to this agenda. Government, and I don't know whether it's through AU or whichever institution, needs to come and build a plan. How are we deploying this? What is the benefit that will accrue? And all this will require data points, research to support that. Because once you are seeking financing from banks or investors, they will look at the cost-benefit analysis, what is in there for them. And until as a continent, we are able to come together and have a very robust plan as to how this could be. It will be difficult for us to attract the needed funding.
Last question on that point. Sorry, I'm pushing you. PPPs have been touted a lot. It's a buzzword now. From your experience in the sector, is that the outlet to crack financing, PPPs?
It is an alternate area you can source financing, but it still comes to the same point that these PPPs are in for returns. So you ultimately need to work on a plan that will attract these investments. And I think that is what we have not been able to do. Even within the West African sub-region, in terms of mobilizing these funds, what is our blueprint in terms of developing our transport network?
All right. So, mind you, I listed 5 problems with AfCFTA. Infrastructure, narrow export base, the financing gap, non-tariff barriers, and then regulations that are conflicting. So I want to take any comments on the financing so that it will be a more structured discussion. Any thoughts on the panel on, is financing the most important problem at all? If it's not, maybe you don't think so. What's the most important problem that AfCFTA needs to crack? Is it the leadership? What is it?
I would say political commitment.
Political will.
It's our biggest problem. So we sign the agreements, but then when it comes to putting in place the local policies and regulations to actually implement it, it's problematic. We like saying we don't have money on the continent. The problem is we have money, but it's deployed in the wrong way.
Okay.
We have pension funds that are garnering very low interest rates sitting in the US. Now, in about X number of years, I'll be calling on my pension. I've got a way to go, but I'm still thinking ahead on calling on my pension. I don't want my pension in risky investments if the regulatory framework is not there. But if the regulatory framework is there, the money is available, okay? Our tax systems, whenever we talk about illicit financial flows, we like to talk a lot about the money our politicians are taking out. We don't fight for the money that large international corporates are taking out that we are not getting back as taxes. So for me, money is not the problem. When our leaders decide they want to do something, they make it happen. And I spoke earlier on about the Lobito corridor in Southern Africa. When they decided to make it happen, I was we are doing some work in Zambia, and I was in a meeting with the Minister of Finance, and I said, how did you guys do this? And they said, it's a combination of private capital, our own national government money. So there were bits of it where their own national government committed because they didn't want to, what do you call it, tolls on it. So in this agreement across X number of countries, if you don't want tolls, you build that bit. But you have to build it. This is the deal we've made. They brought in foreign direct investment. A lot of work went into project preparation. A lot of work went into cross-border challenges that they had to navigate. A lot of work went into agreeing standards. Because every single one on that corridor has an incentive. From copper to EV batteries, the end game is actually electric vehicles in South Africa. That's what they're all going after. And if we can get that electric vehicle market in South Africa really working well, we won't just export to Africa. Our target is way beyond that. We are going after Europe and North America with our EV cars.
Okay.
If we can get, but they are not looking at it as, let's do everything in Zambia. Let's do everything in Zimbabwe.
Follow-up question
let's
for
not
you.
do everything here. It's about, let's do a little bit here. Let's specialize in this. Let's specialize in this. Let's specialize in this. And together, let's win the war.
Maybe it's on the Lobito corridor. Are you suggesting that it may make more sense to look at African integration from a regional bloc's perspective? West Africans, the East Africans, the SADC guys, then eventually the bloc together. Is that a better approach?
In the short to medium term, it probably would be the quickest and best approach. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect. But because our countries were built to trade raw materials out, okay, the ability to try and interconnect it all at once is going to be difficult. So if we can be more intentional, and somebody said earlier on about focus, planning, etc., I'd like to say we need to be more intentional. If we can be more intentional and say, okay, I'm going to be a bit controversial, can I? Okay. We are all talking about tomato factories in Ghana right now.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Aliko Dangote's factory does not have enough raw materials to produce canned tomatoes, okay? If we all said, actually, forget trying to do it on each of our doorsteps, we are all going to find a way of getting our excess tomatoes to this factory and let this factory provide it at a cost-effective rate. And we can all get access to local tin tomatoes in low season at an affordable rate. At the same time, movement of labor becomes easy. So it's not just Nigerians in the factory. Wherever we have skills in the sub-region, we can go. Okay? And we make that commitment. We might lose out on tomato production in Ghana. But do you know what everybody thinks about when they think about shea butter? They don't think about anywhere but Ghana. Everybody thinks shea butter comes from Ghana. But actually, less than, I think it's something like 30% of the shea trees that we used to ship out is actually grown in Ghana. They buy the bulk of the share in the countries around the region.
Okay.
Around the region, and then they produce it in Ghana. So we say, okay, we're going to be the shea hub for West Africa and do it seriously. Okay. I'm just giving examples of how we can make the connectivity work.
Okay.
But Ben, everybody's talking about roads, okay? And everybody's talking about trains and all of it. If we build the infrastructure, but the basic trade facilitation systems are not working. If I get to the border and I'm still being harassed because I'm a woman, if I get to the border and I'm still being harassed because I'm carrying X, we can have the best infrastructure in the world. It still will.
So for you, the
not.
political will is at the top.
Number one.
All right. Let me take Doc's view on what AfCFTA needs to do. You put up a nice building for them, and they have a nice CEO who gives very beautiful speeches. But I suspect your intention was not for that. You wanted more traction. So what are your top 3 or 4 things you think we need to do for AfCFTA to really kick off?
Thank you very much. But just to correct that, I was working on behalf of the Republic of Ghana and not
Oh, of course.
for myself.
Oh, forgive
The
me.
president at the time, who is still our president, is Excellency John Mahama. So that was part of his vision, and it is with his authority and support that we made that kind of progress.
Okay.
Now, when we come to the implementation of AfCFTA, it's at different levels. I think what we must acknowledge, when we say political will or leadership, we can always blame, if you like to use that word, our leaders. But the honest truth is that our leaders, as far back as the 60s, especially through Kwame Nkrumah, our first president, they recognized the importance of collective action. They were the ones who suggested, let's have an African Union with a headquarters in Addis Ababa, which has been there for almost 70 years, doing hopefully reasonably appropriate things. It is the African Union which gave birth to the African Continental Free Trade Secretariat. Yeah. So we must recognize that political will flowing through that. It's the same African nations, political will, who created ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, and also put money into some of the ECOWAS institutions, that's as ECOWAS Bank, ECOWAS Fund. These are all financial institutions. So the politicians have misbehaved often, yes, but they also take sensible decisions on our collective behalf, which, when we implement them, hopefully we'll get the right results. But here are financial people or bankers in a room, and we are talking about remittances. If we say that, okay, Ghana probably got 6 billion or whatever in remittances, if you do collective African remittances, it's in the 90 to 100 billion range per annum.
Yes.
So that's a source of money which goes to people's mothers and fathers and uncles in their little villages and towns, but there's no collective system of aggregating those funds to do infrastructure work or whatever. So there's a time for an African diaspora fund, African infrastructure fund, all kinds of African. I have to say, I think Pan-African. Yeah. That's why I may be the only one in this room who has a small office called Africa House. If anybody has an Africa House, let me know so that I also withdraw that particular statement. But that's how I think. And that's partly also why I'm championing an Africa business
ABCDE.
Business,
yes.
Center for Developing Education. That's on the educational side.
ABC.
And so the skills development issues that we need to inculcate or bring into the AfCFTA area, both in terms of behavioral skills and all the things that our law enforcement agencies do on the borders that interfere with a woman coming with, or a man coming with goods and services and, being hit with informal, unofficial, corrupt, stealing, whatever that goes on. Those are all things that must be inculcated in ourselves, in our children, in our grandchildren, all throughout. So the education system has something to do with that. But coming back to the financing part, which was a problem, the remittances were one. The pension funds, the pensions are, to the best of my knowledge or recollection, in Ghana alone, I think it's an African figure. It's in the 600 billion range, Pan-African. So where's that Pan-African pension fund, which could easily do any number of things? The long-term funds are what we need for railways. So let us look at what our colonial masters did. We had raw materials. They wanted to bring it to the coast. What did they do? They didn't build all kinds of roads. They went straight to railways, being the cheapest volume, transformational undertaking infrastructure in any part of the world. If any of us go anywhere in the world, we take trains from this to that. We take trains from New York to Washington, from Osaka to Tokyo. So the train system, very critical. We are talking about going to Burkina Faso. Yes, we've had that on the drawing board for many years, but implementation is not there. Actually, people end up stealing the railway tracks, the physical railway tracks. So hopefully the oral people will come up with who has been doing the railway track stealing one of these days. So the infrastructure program. Now, Kwame Nkrumah also set an example, Black Star Line. So there's a time this one country of Ghana had 22 merchant ships which were sailing the seas of Africa. And the idea was to have an African shipping line. Because Black Star Line came from the idea of Marcus Garvey from the 1920s. Why shouldn't Africa and African Americans and Caribbean Africans who also ship from Africa come in one force to create a shipping line instead of depending on European or other shipping lines who bring goods and services. I'm talking about after now. Because your shipments, if they are owned by other people, you can't really have control over your economy, the cost, the financing, the insurance, and all those things. And so there's an African insurance organization, mostly in East Africa, Africa Trade Insurance. Okay, so the financial building blocks are more or less in place. African Development Bank is there. African Export Bank is there. The Africa Trade Insurance people are there. I'm saying now let's add African pensions, let's add African remittances, and then the member countries can implement these programs more efficiently. But then the human factor will always be there. How to stop ordinary police people, ordinary border guards, or whoever they call themselves, gendarmes, interfering with the trade. And those then become local implementation issues. Wow. There's a lot to be said. But I was also an advisor at one time to an African railway project, which didn't get very far. But there's a continental thinking about that. I've been also both a shareholder and a partner, an advisor to an African telecommunication infrastructure project, fiber optic, to link up the countries, which also reduce the cost of knowledge transmission and commercial transmission and this and that. So there are many things that I'm saying that the Pan-African approach is key to me in terms of almost everything you want to do, to reduce the cost, to aggregate the market size, because any country by itself is small. Ghana is a very, very small country in global economy. Even the whole of Africa, we are often less than 2% of global trade, 2% of global savings, 2% of almost everything. So until we aggregate our strength, we are always a small fry. We have our Gadugu Accord, which was supposed to unify African airlines. We had Air Afrique at one time, mostly Pan-African. I mean, it was a Francophone African project. And also that collapsed for reasons we can't get into today. So Africa has tried to do some collective projects, some of which have worked very well. I was part of East and Southern Africa telecom project called EASY when I was at the Common Telecom Organization. We put that project together, put the regulatory and protocols together, Kigali Accord, and it's working till today. 22 countries own that common infrastructure for telecommunications in the Eastern and Southern African corridor. So these things are possible, but we must do more. Thank you.
Thank you. A round of applause for the panel. Just a second. Just to remind everybody that we are live on ChannelOne television. It's 2 minutes to 11. We're also live on 97.3 Citi FM. This is the Citi Business Forum, and we're basically discussing global trade uncertainties as expressed through President Trump's tariff agenda. And we're zeroing in on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So essentially, my panel is saying that whatever Mr. Trump does, our long-term solution is in acting together and starting with ourselves, which is why I zeroed in on the AfTA, pointing out about 5 issues in AfTA that need to be addressed. I like to say that on the finance side, we've had some important suggestions in terms of unlocking pensions, in terms of aggregating private remittance to make it a powerful vehicle for infrastructural transformation. We've also been told that for the infrastructure side, rail seems to be the most sensible for long term. Telecommunications infrastructure also critical as well. Political will has also been pointed out by another panelist that is part of the challenge that we need to address. The only thing I haven't seen yet is non-tariff barriers, but I've had allusions to that. And then, of course, the narrow export base has been eloquently articulated by Michael. Now, the only thing I just wanted to ask finally before we open the floor is, so yes, Ghana is a small country, But Doc, so too is Vietnam. All right? So too is Cambodia. So too is Thailand. These days, look, a lot of the footballs we play, they are made in those countries. A lot of the T-shirts we wear, they found a way to become the world's, what's the word I want to use? The world's, whatever. They are skilled at certain things, and they do it so well that even large-scale global organizations go and make those things there. So what I'm asking is, we can say AfCFTA and everything, but what can Ghana do to diversify? Because that's something within our control, right? So cocoa, gold, oil are there other areas we can seriously, strategically diversify into, which will give us an advantage? For example, produce a lot of cotton within the West African Sahel zone. Should we be having a program on textiles? All right. There's a whole conversation about cashew. You also spoke about shea and the cosmetics industry, the so-called non-traditional exports. I want somebody to give me something Ghana should focus on. Whilst the African group does whatever they do, any thoughts around one or two areas that the country strategically should say, we're going to get a chunk of this and we're going to use that as a key driver of diversification. So this is for the panel before I open the... So who's going to take that for me?
If I have to select one project, I'll say jewelry.
Jewelry.
We have the gold. We are not, and it's being used a certain way. And our forefathers, almost in all villages, there was a goldsmith somewhere. Goldsmith. Now the word goldsmith probably is disappearing even from our dictionaries. And if you ask anybody, do you know any goldsmith in your village or in your hometown or in Sekandi Takradi or Kumasi? Most people do not know a goldsmith. And yet there has been jewelry processing and refining and training department in the University of Science and Technology. In fact, they even called me at one time to be chairman of that organization for a certain number of years. And so the skills development, I know there are a few companies in Ghana that are jewelry manufacturing companies, but now that we have a gold board and the jewelry production part is all part of the gold board's responsibility, we must highlight that. And with this 24-hour economy where people can be trained and skilled in all kinds of fields, if we decide that we're going to convert our $16 billion of gold exports, not in raw form, but at least we must, that's what 50% in jewelry form. You see, an ounce of gold may be $3,000 or whatever it is today. But if you convert that 1 ounce of gold and you get it marketed by Beyonce, for example, or some other celebrity, that ounce of gold is $100,000 because of the person wearing it or the name brand on it. All these European name brands that we like, Louis Vuitton, whatever it is that we, the leather itself is only, less than 10 cedis or $20. But because of the name on it, we can also have a sewa, gold.
So for you, jewelry is one
jewelry,
area.
Certainly. You can do furniture, you can do all kinds of
So I'm taking everybody's one. You think jewelry is a good because of the way it works. Emmanuel.
Thanks, Bernard. So maybe we may look at the palm industry and what Malaysia... Palm.
Okay.
And what Malaysia has done with palm.
Oil palm.
We are in this country... soap manufacturing businesses are importing palm crude. Why should that be so? And I think whilst we are looking at exporting, we also need to look at what can we substitute and reduce our imports.
Correct.
Because balancing trade is a two-lever.
Yes, sir.
You either bringing down your imports and then increasing your exports.
So we're talking about import substitution.
Import substitution. So what can we do
to
build that palm value chain such that industries who need this material to produce will be able to get them locally and even feed it to the sub-region.
All right.
I think it's a critical area. Then one last thing I want to highlight is our cocoa industry when it comes to value chain. We have over 500,000 metric ton capacity when it comes to processing of cocoa.
All right.
Out of that, less than 50% is currently being used. And we continue to export raw beans out of this country. Why should that happen?
That is good. So we have gold, we have palm, we have cocoa. Let me come to Mavis on any other area of diversification you think Ghana should be seriously considering.
So Ben, this is our problem. We have too many options. So we never focus.
Oh, Lord.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
So if you look at, if you even look at the latest asset report that we did on where Ghana should diversify, I believe we picked 8 areas.
8.
Ghana cannot do 8 properly. Okay, we've got to be intentional in picking 1 or 2.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, honestly, I can sit here and tell you my favorite 2. My favorite 2 at the moment are textiles and chocolate.
Textiles
Simple
and
yeah.
chocolate.
And it has to be done across the sub-region. It has to be something we work with our partners on. So, the cotton for Ghana, the West Africa fashion industry, it has to be very intentional in how we do it. Okay, and I'm picking that because the government has said that they want to do the Akosombo link. I think it's a great opportunity for the corridor.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart to go into supermarkets in Ghana, and see that our Ghanaian chocolates cannot compete with rubbish American chocolate. It really breaks my heart. So that's why I have my own little pet project on Ghana chocolate, and I'm a big champion of Ghanaian chocolatiers.
Wonderful.
That's
Thank you.
my thing. But Ben, I know you are Russian. One very quick thing. I think right now, somebody needs to pick 2. And 1 is not agro-processing. Agro-processing is not a sector.
It's too broad.
It's too broad. Pick 2 things, and let's just get on with it. Because when you asked just now about Vietnam is a small country, how did they do it? Yeah. They picked 1 thing, and they got on with it. They didn't have 8 ideas on a panel. Somebody has to make that decision, and we just need to put our eggs in that basket and go for it.
Luckily, there are some institutions in this room who are part of the answer in terms of where the priority of government is. So, for example, we have Development Bank Ghana here, who I believe focus on key areas of government in terms of unlocking long-term capital. So I'll come to them shortly. I don't know if I have Exim Bank here. It would be nice to also hear from them as well. But let me take, Michael, your quick comment on area. I've heard textiles, I've heard chocolate, I've had palm, I've had cocoa, I've had jewelry. Anything else that you believe should be an area we should consider for diversification?
Mindset.
Mindset. Messi. The mindset of the African. Wow. Do you get to elaborate?
That's where it all starts.
Okay.
That's where it all starts. From our leaders all the way down to the youngest toddler that's growing into this culture.
Yeah.
We have a mindset problem. And not until we transform that mindset, we cannot transform the economy.
Wow.
So we like to, and I'm becoming very frustrated with these panel discussions. I've been a part of so many of these discussions.
You're not even 50 years old.
I'm not yet.
So imagine what SPO will be. If you are frustrated, then SPO should be,
we have these discussions all the time.
Yeah.
We have these brilliant discussions, Get
on with it.
And we're still where we are.
Yes.
It's frustrating, it's depressing.
Oh, Lord.
So there's something wrong with our mindset, obviously. And we need to transform that.
All right.
Because before we can transform anything, before we can diversify in anything. I don't have the answer. Okay. Some way, somehow, we've got to figure that out.
Okay.
But I think if you ask me, we have to treat that as a priority product. The way we treat our priority products. We have to choose 8 products. We should always make sure there's a 9th product, which is mindset.
The mindset. Wonderful.
If we're choosing 5, there should always be a 6th one,
which is the mindset.
Maybe says 2. I would say we should add a 3rd one, which is mindset.
Correct.
Before, the whole intra-Africa trade thing, let me just come back to that. Before I go to that, cashew. Ivory Coast produces more cashew than Vietnam.
Yeah.
But Vietnam's cashew exports are about 10 times more than the value of Ivory Coast's cashew exports. And the only difference is one country just exports raw cashew, and the other one buys raw cashew from everywhere,
including Ghana.
And that's a lot of value addition. And they're making 10 times more.
Yeah.
And in Ghana, we are in the same situation.
Yeah.
This, you can't tell me, is because we can't get financing to do value addition. You can't tell me it's because we can't build infrastructure, we can't build factories. It's a mindset problem. Right? The discussions we've had about inter-Africa trade, we keep talking about building rails and all of that, and I'm all for that. But there are simple things we should do that we're not doing. There's air cargo and there's air freight. There's so much inter-Africa trade we can get going just with airlines.
Okay.
You don't have to build a rail. It just flies and lands. We can do that. We're not doing that because sometimes I feel we are not willing and ready to actually do the trade. We like talking about Pan-Africanism. We like talking about inter-Africa trade. Are we actually willing to do it?
That's the question.
You know? I don't know.
Don't get frustrated. You have many more years to live.
But I can only zero it down to a mindset issue.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we should add that. We should include that as one of the priorities.
I saw you were trying to applaud when you mentioned mindset. So you should applaud. If that's what you wanted to do, you can do it now. So put your hands together for the panel. We're still live here at Alisa Hotel. 2 quick statistics for you. Africa currently imports over 70% of its apparel. So collectively as a continent, we import 70% of the clothes we wear. We import between 66 to 73% of our cocoa-based products, final products. We also import over half of our automotive and processed mineral needs from outside the continent. Just to buttress the point that there's a big market for these things here if we would get on with it, using maybe this word.